We are back here on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, WFUV, WFUV.org, all those things. My name is Dylan Balsamo, along with my partner, Andrew Galata. Thanks for sticking with us, and we have a treat for you right now. Our two guests right now have separately written for Sports Illustrated and Deadspin and a handful of other places, but they have combined forces for a new podcast called Ladies Room. The first two episodes are up, and must I say, it is delightful. Julie DiCaro and Jane McManus have joined us. How are you two?
Good. Just hanging out on a Friday, just, fully in our PJs.
Yeah, this is actually my Saturday, so I am still in my pajamas, still on my bed. So pretty much par for the course for the last 9 months.
The audience can't see it, but I'm wearing pajama bottoms as we speak, so I completely understand.
We're a couple pillows short of a party, I think, but
yeah, exactly.
Certainly, those feathery pillows that are all over the place. But let's get ready to know. First question is this podcast. How did it come to be? Did you two know each other before this? Was this your idea? Was it somebody else's idea? Was there chemistry tests that needed to be done? How did this come to be?
How did it come to be? Well, Jane, we did know each other in the sense that all women working in this industry know each other, more or less. But mostly Twitter. We hadn't actually ever done anything together before.
Yeah, that's right. And I do remember, when I was having some discussions about whether or not to, switch the place where I was writing columns, what part of the allure of Deadspin was Julie and being able to do a podcast with her. It's something that I wasn't able to do where I was before, and I've always respected her, and I love doing a podcast. And before, when I was at ESPN, I'd done radio and I'd really enjoyed that. So kind of wanted to see, if I could do that again, and was really excited about the opportunity of working with Julie.
And then we got on the phone a couple times, and it lasted a really long time, and we were just cackling the entire time. So I think we knew pretty early on that we got along really well. And I was missing radio. I'd lost my radio job due to the pandemic in April. So I was hired at Deadspin with an eye towards doing podcasts. But until they sort of presented this to me and said, would you be willing to do a podcast with Jane McManus? Nothing had really been said to me about podcasts. And of course, who wouldn't want to do a podcast with Jane McManus? So of course I said yes.
I'd like to ask you guys, what was the goal or motivation behind starting it? I think it's a really unique idea and a really good idea. So what was the goal or motivation that you guys want out of this podcast, and how did it kind of come about?
I'll start this, Julie, because I'll say that there are actually a number of really great podcasts that are being done by women in sports right now. And, Burn It All Down is one of them that I've loved for years. And Nancy Armour at USA Today has a great podcast. Sarah Spain has a really nice podcast. Mina Kimes. So there's certainly work in this space. But, for me, the way that I looked at it was, it's great that it's not just one podcast of women talking about sports. I want there to be a million podcasts, women talking about sports. And so I kind of feel like, let's flood the zone, let's have something that kind of puts our stamp on it, giving access to, giving a platform and discussing things off of the field and on the field with people that we find interesting, being able to take on some issues that we find and care about. So that's part of it for me. It's not that there aren't women in sports media doing podcasts, but again, I think the more, the merrier.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, I get really tired of turning on post NFL shows or post MLB shows or post NBA shows and seeing just four dudes sitting there. The fandom, whether we're talking about the NFL, which has by far, I think the biggest percentage of women watching, it's almost 50%. We are fans in a number that is not represented by most of the sports media. And a lot of women working in sports media these days are still the only woman in the room at the place they work. And so I think that our voices and our perspectives get shut out of the conversation a lot. And, for me, there's always a desire to try to rectify that by being really loud and making everyone listen to what I have to say. So a podcast is a great way to do that.
I totally agree that it could be very tiring to just watch a bunch of dudes on a post-game show. And to our audience, thanks again for joining us here on One, a show hosted by four dudes. But Julie, I have a question for you because you have a book in the works right now,
Yes,
right?
I
All right.
do. It's coming out in March.
Coming out in March. That's wonderful. Your anniversary of COVID. But anyways, the book is sidelined, and the subtitle, of course, Sports Culture and Being a Woman in America. But I'm curious as to how long has this idea been in your head of writing a book like this? How did it come to be? Who did you have to be in contact with to get it to happen? Tell us the story of the infancy of this book.
Actually, someone reached out to me from a publishing house and said, I follow you on Twitter, and a lot of what you have to say I think should be expanded on, and that I think there needs to be a book and you should write it. So I went and I met with them, and actually didn't wind up writing for them, but the comedian Josh Gondelman introduced me to his agent, who's now my agent, and he helped me sort of take all the things that were swimming around in my head that I wanted to talk about and shape them into something that was, I guess, palatable for people to want to read. So I guess all these thoughts and stuff have been out there for a long time. So a lot of times I think that when you're the only woman in the room, you feel like you can't say them, or women who do say them get like a real backlash, online, or, if you're on the radio, like I was, you get a lot of it there. So I don't know. I mean, for me, it's kind of nice in that it's the one place I can say stuff without an instant backlash, right? I mean, they're going to have to read the book first and then go to Twitter or go to wherever, send me emails. They're not going to be able to just clap back at me immediately. So in that sense, I think it's kind of, that was really appealing to me. So it was just one of those things that, of course, I think every writer wants to write a book at some point, but it really just sort of fell into my lap.
And Jane, I know you used to cover the Jets for ESPN, and obviously it's not been a good season for the Jets this year, 0-13.
Well,
And
unless you're talking about, next year's draft pick, then it's
Exactly.
been an excellent season.
yeah,
Arguably the best year in that season.
yeah, especially
It's really,
especially
right. What's
with,
your goal? What's your goal as a team? Our goal is to get a really good draft pick next year. Maybe that's the way to look at it.
yeah, and especially with Trevor Lawrence there, I think that's
Right,
I mean, it could be
exactly.
one of the best draft picks in a really long time. But
And you know how great the Jets are with quarterbacks too. So it's really important. It's really important to get a good quarterback and just absolutely destroy him.
Yeah. And I would say this is a big offseason for the Jets, especially because, I mean, you're basically probably going to, firehouse everything, probably fire Adam Gase, draft a new quarterback. But besides getting a new coach, getting a new quarterback, what would you do to start building a foundation for success in New York?
Get a new owner.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, honestly, I think that's where the New York problems start with a number of different teams, right? We've just seen new ownerships come to the Mets, and people are hopeful because of new ownership, not because of a new team or dynamic or anything, but it's money. It's cash. It's what you're willing to spend on players and how you're willing to conduct and the kind of personnel you get in and the direction you're willing to take. I think, long-suffering Knicks fans such as myself kind of look at that franchise as well and wish the Dolans didn't own it and see, what had been happening there for years and years. I think it's true. The same is true with the Jets. I don't think Woody Johnson's a great owner. He just doesn't seem like, I know we joke about, or I joked, you all laughed along politely, but I joked about the quarterbacks earlier, but it's really true. Back when I was covering the team, I saw Mark Sanchez and Geno Smith, systematically taken down. And bringing in, like when I was there, the Sanchez era, they brought in Tim Tebow as a backup, which was disastrous for young Mark Sanchez's delicate psyche. Because it was like the number 2 quarterback on the team was constantly getting more attention and questions about when he was going to start. I mean, it was a crazy season, but it's just moves like that. And he was, Tebow was brought in because he was a splash and he was a name and he had he had a following and a real kind of stake in the culture at that time. And, making decisions like that are very short-sighted, and they're not based on competitive decisions. And I think so, to me, I think you need an ownership group and that's going to make decisions that are going to ultimately lead to a more competitive team. There's no accident that, you have, the Rooneys and the Maras and being able to keep, not so much this year, but certainly the Giants have been competitive and have won Super Bowls and competed for Super Bowls in recent living history. the Steelers are often competitive too. And, so I think ownership has a lot to do with it. And I don't think the Jets ownership is very good.
That is a very hot take.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
so where's the lie?
No, there is no lie. Not at all. Not at all. I don't think anyone's going to be particularly criticized for saying such. But Julie, I have another question for you. So not long before we hopped on this Zoom call, I happened upon an article of yours from Sports Illustrated in 2015 that caught my eye, of you talking about how you did not come up in the traditional way of sports writing that many sports writers do. So I'm curious as to, do you think, not just in the industry, but as a writer in your craft, do you think that helped you? Do you think that hindered you? Where do you think that put you in the general sense of things?
I think, gosh, I think that was the article where I was clapping back at Jason Whitlock for complaining that there's too many bloggers that don't go to journalism school. Like, I did go to journalism school. But, at the time that I graduated, the internet still hadn't really blossomed into what it is now as far as blogging. So there was really, your only option if you wanted to be a sports writer was go to like some small town paper and cover like high school basketball. If you're lucky, you get to cover high school basketball and sort of work your way up. And there were so few of those jobs, and they mostly went to guys anyway. So there wasn't really an option for a woman. And I think that going to law school and being a lawyer, like, I got my foot in the door in this industry because I could talk about criminal justice things that were happening with players. And had I not been able to do that, I'm not sure that people would have paid any attention to me. So it's great. I mean, things are different now, whatever you want to do, if you want to be on camera, you can start a YouTube channel, or, if you want to be in audio, if you want to work in radio, you can start a podcast. If you want to be a writer, you start a blog. But it really wasn't like that back then. So there's far fewer barriers, I think, for people entering the industry. Now it's just really all about building up a following in your medium, and then, transferring that to whatever it is that you want to do or wherever you want to work. But I think that at the time that I sort of got my foot in the door, being able to say that I was a lawyer first carried a little bit of weight with people. And for that reason, they were willing to listen and pay more attention to me, I think, than they would have otherwise.
That is so interesting, Julie. I love this about our backgrounds, because I was a paralegal for 2 years in New York City.
You were?
I was.
I worked at that.
Yeah, I worked at Cravath, Swain & Moore.
I had no idea.
Believe it or not. Yeah. So I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and that was before I went to J school. But we worked on a couple of cases, like we worked on the NBA antitrust case, and then Cravath at that time repped HBO, and there was some contract litigation in boxing with Riddick Bowe and Rock Newman, who was his agent at the time. And so I got really interested, and I'd always been interested in sports, and I was playing a ton of sports at the time, but I'd always really interested in that from the legal standpoint. And I think that helped me as well, because I was able to read, court filings and figure stuff out. And that ended up being really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, just being able to tell people what they're looking at, or tell people like, well, okay, this is a, sexual assault allegation. This is the way this is probably going to go. I mean, just being able to have that experience to say stuff like that. And unfortunately, then part of the problem is that, you get pigeonholed into talking about that stuff exclusively. But, so it's a little bit more difficult to transition out of that to talking about like X's and O's sports, which I got a chance to do in radio, and I was really grateful for. But yeah, I think that definitely, especially for women, I think that it's easier if you are a sports writer plus, to be able to attract some followers, which is really what you need to succeed in this business.
Yeah, and kind of going off that, you guys are saying how like now there's podcasts, and like before there really wasn't that, or whether it be streaming, YouTube, all that stuff. Do you feel like the landscape of sports media will kind of stay like this for a little, or change even more? And I know that especially like sports, especially going to like Amazon and like starting that as well, so like more streaming games instead of network channels. Where do you think like the next steps for that are in the industry?
This is a great opportunity to mention that we had Andrea Kramer on our podcast, who does that broadcast for Amazon, the NFL broadcast on a weekly basis for Amazon, which is really interesting. I mean, I think that sports media is in the middle of a revolution right now. And this comes in from, at Marist College, I'm the director of the Center for Sports Communication. And so I'm often thinking about where are the jobs that our students are going to get? Where are they emerging? Because, as Julie was mentioning, it used to be that you started off writing at a newspaper and you'd write high school sports for a couple of years. I mean, I took the traditional route. But I think now that route is all but shut down, especially given the financial pressure that the pandemic has put on the ailing newspaper industry already. And so you're looking at a lot of non-traditional outlets now for students to start working. When I started out, you would never have gone to work for a team, writing for a team website or doing broadcast for a team site. That was considered going from journalism to PR. Now that's completely different. And I think it's less about the integrity of the outlet that you work for, and it's more about the integrity that you bring and your own personal way of conducting business. So I think in some ways that puts more pressure on young journalists because they are measured by their work, certainly, but they're going to be working and doing work that just wouldn't necessarily be, it doesn't groom them in the same way. They can't put it forward in the same way. You may be writing headlines for a web outlet as your first job. There are just a lot of differences, but I do think we're seeing, in some ways that's great because it's democracy in action. If you can have a blog and get your voice out there or break news, but at the same time, it does mean that everyone coming into the industry now really does have to pick their path. And I think in some ways it's like jumping from, there's this scene in Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs of the hero having to rescue someone by jumping from fry to fry in a vat of boiling oil. And I kind of feel like your first couple of jobs in the media industry are jumping from fry to fry on a vat of boiling oil, to be optimistic about it.
Yeah, and I think as far as the divergent streams and the different channels that you have options, I mean, obviously a lot of women don't like tune into sports radio or do things like that because they don't feel welcome, right? So I mean, having Hannah Storm and Andrea Kramer doing Calling the Game on Amazon Prime and having that be a place where women can go where they feel more comfortable and they feel more accepted as fans, and it's also a great thing to have on in your house when you have kids to normalize women being in sports and calling games. That's terrific. And I think that, hopefully we continue to expand in that direction. Everybody's, cash strapped right now because of the pandemic, but, I mean, for the same thing I know baseball, we've had multiple streams, and I don't necessarily want to watch a baseball game and have, some like 70-year-old announcers who are bagging on statistics and talking about how they've ruined the game. I'd rather flip over to another channel and listen to Jason Benetti, who's very well versed in sabermetrics, talk about the game. So I think it is more entrees into every sport for people, for different kinds of people, and that's, I think, a good thing.
We have one last question. We've talked about how the landscape of sports media is changing, which obviously means it has changed since the two of you started. So let me ask you, if we were to, I don't know if we have any young female aspiring sports media personalities watching. I don't know our Nielsen ratings or whatever you call them on the internet. But and I'm sure, Jane, you probably know a few yourself, given your position at Marist. But if there's one thing you can say to them if they're watching, what would that thing be to encourage them?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Keep, you belong is what is my big message to young men and young women in the industry, but you belong and your voice is important, especially young people of color as well. I think, like what Julie said, there's a place here for voices, for people who have come from different backgrounds, who experience things in different ways. Just like you have former players on a broadcast and they offer a particular point of view that's been very coveted. I think there are other voices that have been less coveted, and there need to be a bigger place at the table for those voices as well. And I do tell young women that, you're going to encounter things that are unacceptable that you have to try to accept in some way, that is just part of the business. And if you are someone who is sensitized, then it's going to be hard. It's not impossible, but it will be harder for you. But just to be aware, I think, of You enter this business, and I always tell people, you need to have kind of a reporter hat, and you do things with your reporter hat on that you wouldn't necessarily do as Jane McManus, human being in the world, right? It's a way for you to distance yourself a little bit professionally from, whatever as a front-facing person you're going to face. And I do think women in this business and people of color in this business just do get more trolling and blowback and criticism, et cetera. So I think you have to be prepared for that. But I also think, it's important to realize that in addition to that, you have real strengths. Like you have things about the way that you're going to have conversations with people, whether it's, the school you went to, the part of the country that you're from, the music that you like, whatever it is, you're going to find ways of relating to people because of who you are and what your individual personality is. And to have that be a strength for you, and to don't be afraid of engaging in that way with people. So, I mean, I think the business is tough in some ways right now, especially if you're not somebody who comes from a family of means. You financially may be struggling, and that's unfortunate. But at the same time, don't give up, because this business is in the middle of a massive change. But, you put in the time now, and perhaps given the next iteration of what's to come, you will be better positioned to take advantage of it.
There's always two things that I tell young women. And the first is get comfortable asking for what you want and talking publicly about what you want and what you've accomplished. I think that, a lot of women are still sort of raised to not toot their own horns, to not be pushy, for lack of a better word. And it wasn't until I was working in radio that I noticed how the differences between men and women, and that men will walk into the program director's door and say, I want my own show and I think I deserve it, and here's why. Whereas women, I think, sort of have this idea that we're just lucky to be there. And I had, when I would complain about not getting opportunities to friends at my old station, one guy would say to me, 1 million women would love to have your job. And thinking back on it now, I'm like, I noticed he didn't say 1 million men would love to have my job, though. And I think that there is sort of this idea that, oh, you're the only woman here. You're lucky to be here. This place could easily be all men. So just be happy with what you have and don't rock the boat. And I don't think that women in an industry this competitive get anywhere without constantly talking about what they've achieved and what they want. And I see men doing that all the time on social media. Far, far fewer women doing it. And the second thing is that you cannot see other women as competition. You have to see them as your allies. I think that because we are conditioned to know that there's only going to be one woman at the table, right? There might be 4 guys and 1 woman. They're never going to put 3 women and a guy on like a post-game show. So we're all competing for that one spot. We're all competing to be that one woman. Everybody wants to be the token woman who's going to be included. And it's led to, I think women, looking at each other as competition, trying to tear each other down, talking behind each other's backs, doing whatever you can to get a leg up on over the other woman. And it really does not serve any of us well, especially because at the end of the day, the other women are going to be the ones who know what you're going through. They're going to know what it's like to be the only woman who walks into a room full of men, and to try to hold your own as the only women there. And we really need to be on each other's side, supporting each other, promoting each other's work, and doing everything we can, not only to push the door open for ourselves, but to hold it for the woman coming behind you. And I know, especially having been in college and in a sorority, I know the levels of competition that exist among women, but it is really something that we have got to get over, because there are just not enough of us to have the luxury to be competitive with each other. We need to be lifting while we're climbing.
That is so well said. And I'm just going to add, Julie, since you've inspired me, but I think the longer that I'm in this business, when I first got in, I thought, oh my gosh, there are going to be so many women coming after me. My first year covering sports was 1998. Or 1987, first year of the Liberty, playing in Madison Square Garden. That meant so much to me. And then, Women's World Cup and the 96, the Olympics, and the American women had won all these gold medals. And I thought, that's it. There's just going to be, I'm the crest of a wave here. And that didn't happen. And I've become to realize through the course of my career that this isn't so much about the individual women as it is about the systems and how women are hired, how they're seen, how they're viewed. We don't necessarily walk in thinking we're the token women, but certainly we're often viewed that way. And that isn't so much about us. That's about the systems in which we work. So to me, you know, as we see so many women getting different opportunities now, like Kim Eng, and we see Sarah Fuller, and we see all of these women rising up in different professional leagues, which is incredibly gratifying to me. At the same time, I think we have to realize that what has held them back is not a lack of talented, powerful, able women. What's held them back are the systems in which they are rising. So I want to see them continue to rise. Some of them fail, right? Because that's what everybody has an opportunity to do. But you know, again, it's an incredibly slow process. I cannot believe that I am more than halfway through my career and there are not more women just crushing the doors behind me.
And for any listeners or viewers interested in Sarah Fuller, Jane wrote a great article for Deadspin the other day. That's Sarah.
Yeah, she did.
But nevertheless, Ladies Room, the first 2 episodes are available wherever you get your podcasts. Julie, Jane, this has been nothing short of delightful. Thank you so much for joining us.
I have to say, for a podcast with 4 guys, you guys are okay.
It was fun. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. We'll be right back here on One on One. Thank you again to Julie and Jane. Stick around, everyone.